Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to the front line with Joe and Joe. Joe Pasillo, as always, joined by Joe Resinello. And once more, dear brothers and sisters, let us go into the breach on the Veritas Catholic Radio Network, 1350 on your AM dial, 103.9 on your FM dial, spreading the truth of the Catholic faith to the New York City metropolitan area. Please download the app, share it with your friends. You'll have access to all of our station's content, original content, and EWTN content. And if you like what Joe and I do, we're all over social media, Rumble, X, Facebook, YouTube. Please like, subscribe, share. If you like what we do, if you like these conversations that we're having, then please share them with a wider audience. We'd really appreciate it. So today, we're welcoming back to the program a friend of the show, another Joe, Father Joseph Fessio, founder and editor of Ignatius Press. And we're going to be discussing Cardinal Robert Sarah's book, He Gave Us So Much, a tribute to Pope Benedict XVI. So this is going to be a great conversation because, as everybody knows, Joe and I like to say that, we want our audience to get educated because when we have guests like Father Fessio, they educate us. They enlighten us. So we really appreciate that. Father Fessio, welcome back to the front line with Joe and Joe.
Thank you, Joe. And Joe, you told people what to do if they like the show. What are they supposed to do if they don't like the show?
I don't know. Your guess is as good as mine. But I think with you as a guest, it's always
Well, we'll find out.
We'll
find out now. We'll find out now.
Father Joseph Fessio is, as I said, the founder and editor of Ignatius Press in San Francisco. He's a graduate of Bellarmine Prep in San Jose, studied civil engineering at Santa Clara University for 3 years before entering the Society of Jesus in 1961. He holds a ThD in theology from the University of Regensburg, where then Father Joseph Ratzinger, later Pope Benedict XVI, directed his thesis on the ecclesiology of Hans Ur von Balthasar. Now, Cardinal Robert Sarah, the author of the book, was born in Guinea, West Africa. He was made an archbishop by Pope St. John Paul II, a cardinal by Pope Benedict XVI, and named the prefect of the Congregation for Divine Worship and the Discipline of the Sacraments by Pope Francis in 2014. Again, Father Fessio, welcome back to the show. I'm gonna kick it over to the other Joe, and we'll have a great conversation.
Well, before you do, just one little element here. We're Italians, and we pronounce things the way they look, right? The French pronounce everything on the last syllable. It's easy to know how to pronounce a French word because the accent is always on the last syllable. So he's from French French-speaking Africa, and so his name in his homeland is Sarah.
Sarah.
But we say Sarah because that's what it looks like in English. But I always say Sarah because it rhymes with hurrah.
I love it.
I love it. Father, would you lead us in a prayer?
Sure. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Heavenly Father, send forth your Spirit upon us to guide our actions and our thoughts, that we may accomplish your will through your Son, Jesus Christ, through the intercession of the Blessed Virgin Mary and all the saints. We ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen. That is kind of a paraphrase of the prayer of today's office. We're recording this on Thursday after Ash Wednesday. There's a beautiful prayer in Lauds that was sort of an imitation of.
Well,
prayer of the church.
Father. Absolutely. Jojo.
Father, I'll be honest. I've read a number of. I'll try.
He's gonna try.
These New York Italians always start with, I'll be honest, I'm always suspicious when a New York
Fair
Italian
enough. You're not the first person that has said that to me too. I say it all the time. I've read a number of Cardinal Sarah's books. I'm a big fan. I think we're blessed to have him. I know a lot about his background, how he came into the church by missionaries in his little village. It's a great story.
Beautiful story.
Really, I mean, because he lived in like, it's so small, and then he became like, he's obviously a huge personality in the church. Do you know?
Joe, wait a minute. You guys talk so much. I'm going to interrupt you.
Please
people
go.
Listen to you all the time, But the point is, what you just said is a perfect example of the real DEI: diversity, equity, and inclusion. That is to say, here is a young kid, barefoot boy, rural Africa, becomes a prince of the church, tremendously well-educated, writes books. I mean, the Catholic Church is equal opportunity. The Catholic Church has diversity, and the Catholic Church really is fulfills the goals that society has, but society misapplies them anyway. just a little note on the Catholic Church as a great exponent and example of real diversity, equity, and inclusion.
I would
Well, what
agree.
I always say on the show, Father Joseph Fessio joining us here, is, because obviously you get false narratives out there, and I'm glad you said that. We are the most inclusive organization in the world. We're not a white European church. Our church was founded in the Middle East. It grew in North Africa, and 2/3 of the population of the Catholic Church are people of color. So I like it. I'm glad you mentioned that, Father Fessio.
Okay, good.
Jojo.
Do you know him? Just out of curiosity.
Yes, I mean, he came here a year or two ago for a conference, and we spent some time together. Had lunch here at Ignatius Press. We drove him back and forth from the conference. Wonderful man, great sense of humor.
I'll be truthful with you. One of the I said it
Keep
again.
saying
Again.
Whenever I see a man like a cleric, he with the Missionaries of Charity, that always says something to me. I know he's close with them in Rome. He really seems to be a very holy person. Let's talk about that a little bit. What is holiness? Because I think sometimes people have a misconception that people are just walking around like with rosary beads in their hand. But he really seems to be a holy man. And another thing I like about him is his book about silence. There came a point, I mean, he has some differences of opinion, we'll just phrase it that way, with regard to the direction maybe the church is going or potentially is now. But he's very respectful and he keeps his mouth shut. And I think there comes a time, and I say this because I don't do it and I should do it more. I look to him and Cardinal Zen. There comes a point where it's time just to pray. And I think he's come full circle on that. Talk about that, because I think that's a wonderful quality. It's a quality I don't have. It's something I aspire to have, and I think he does. What are your thoughts?
Well, because you read that book, The Power of Silence, but didn't take it to heart, as far as I can tell. And it's a good thing you didn't, because how can you have a radio show if all you do is have silence, right? But I was actually thinking just this morning, as I was kind of groggily getting out of bed, I don't want to be a saint, in the sense that, what does that mean to want to be a saint? I want to do God's will. If that makes me holy, all the better. But the point is to love God and to do his will and try to accomplish that in the world. And that's what I think Sarah does. We have to try to do that ourselves. But trying to be a saint has a danger of over introspection, looking at myself like in a mirror. How am I doing? Am I holy? Am I or not? Christ is the holiest of holy ones, not because he looked into himself, but he looked at the Father. He was the image of the Father, and he looked at the Father, and the Father's of the world was reflected back. And then Christ, because his Father loves the world as well, doing the Father's will. So I believe that we all have a mission, and we're all called to do God's will in different ways, because he's calling us to different things. And Cardinal Sarah is doing it in his way, unique way. As Father Dudebach once told me, it was saying before him, but there's no people who are more unlike each other than the saints. And there are no people who are more like Christ than the saints. That's precisely because every person doing God's will is a little reflection, a ray, a fragment of Christ, the fullness of God's divinity in Christ. So, yeah, is he a holy man? I think he is, because he's doing the Lord's will. And like you say, he's very respectful of authority. He writes in a very kind and gentle way, but is also incisive.
Thank you for that. Father Joseph Fessio is joining us here at the front line with Joe and Joe. Please go out and buy the book that we're discussing. It's published by Ignatius Press, of which Father Joseph Fessio is the founder and editor. The book is written by Cardinal Robert Sarah. He gave us so much, a tribute to Pope Benedict XVI. Father Fessio, Joe and I have said many times on the show, just using our own crude method of observation, looking at the world, okay? It seems like America and Europe are on some sort of a suicide mission. And Joe and I think that the church, the future of the church, the resurgence in the church, that I think we could all agree we may need, is going to start in Africa. And Pope Benedict, correct me if I'm wrong, went there several times. Your thoughts on that comment I just made?
Yes. Well, I totally agree with you that Africa is the future of the church in many ways. Reminds me what happened in European history, that after the fall of the Roman Empire and the spread of the church to the monasteries, in Western Europe and Eastern Europe, there was a decline, and there was a kind of a corruption set in. But this young church in Ireland sent missionaries back to Europe. Columbus and Columbanus came back and founded monasteries and re-evangelized much of Europe. In Italy, the great monastery of Bobbio was founded by one of them. And I see it's happening now. We evangelized Africa, especially the 1900s, when there were maybe 2 million Catholics in Africa. In 1900, there's 100 million now or more. I'm not sure my numbers are exactly accurate, but something of that order of magnitude. And so, yes, I think that they're going to re-energize the church, not just in the United States, but elsewhere. However, I do think the church in the United States is quite healthy right now. When I think of 600 Catholic radio stations around the country, there used to be none. Well, two. In 1997, there were 2 stations in the United States that were owned by Catholic institutions broadcasting Catholic material. There were more that were owned by Catholic institutions like universities, but they were broadcasting Korean news or jazz or something like that. But now we have, see that, 600 stations. And you know something? I don't know a single one that's not with the Lord and with the church. No, there's no dissenting, progressive, liberalizing, crazy Catholics running those stations. So that's one thing. Look at homeschooling. I mean, we've got, it's not allowed in Germany, we've got homeschools, Catholic homeschools around the country, young people having families. We've got young priests. We've got a lot of good bishops. I mean, really, we've got a great episcopacy. Families are growing. Even though the culture of the country is very corrosive and corrupting, I think the church is really strong in the laity. Look what you guys are doing. I mean, what would have happened 50 years ago? 2 laymen want to talk to people about the faith. You wouldn't have a platform at all. So anyway, back to your, 3 Italians gabbing together. I'm telling you, it's a problem. But I think you're right that the church in Africa is vital and is vigorous. And for example, what happened recently? The Pope's doctrine man, Cardinal Fernandez, issued a statement on blessing gay couples, and others in irregular situations. And the African bishops said, we're not going to implement this here. We can't do that. We don't think this is consistent with our culture and with what the gospel requires of us. They were bold, but they were respectful too. In fact, I admire Pope Francis for this. The bishops of Africa made a collective statement. By the way, Africa is a huge place. It's a massive continent. There are 51 bishops' conferences in Africa. We got one in the U.S. There's 51 bishops' conferences there. They're united, except for, I think, South Africa and some in North Africa, but most of Central Africa. And they had the Pope vet their statement. Their statement was actually critical of the Pope, but respectful. The Pope allowed them to make that statement. Now, to me, Francis gets a bonus merit point for that. But the point is, those bishops were speaking strongly. They were speaking firmly. They were speaking, boldly. And so I love that.
And I think that's where I was, what I meant, just to clarify, Father Joseph Fessio, was that the European and American culture was on a suicide mission. Certainly, we would agree with you, Joe and I, that yes, I'm in Arizona. That there's a vibrant, dynamic, outspoken and bold Catholic Catholic community here, in the Diocese of Phoenix, and obviously Joe in New York and Northern New Jersey, we see the same thing. So I just want to clarify that. I know what you're saying, but I was talking more about American and European culture, which seems to be rotting. And quite frankly, and I think this is correct, the only thing that's really going to save it is bold. Bold speaking, let's put it like that, by people like us and Catholics in Africa and Catholics in Europe and Catholics in America to defeat this rot of a culture that we have. That's my little rant, Father Fessio.
Good. That's all right. We may not defeat it. I mean, we may defeat it like Christ defeated sin by dying.
Yeah. I mean, that's one thing to think about. Joe Resinello.
I like what you said about Pope Francis, and one thing I thought was interesting, to give him another bonus point, is Cardinal Sarah dedicated the book to him. He said to Pope Francis, "And thanks for his merciful fatherhood over the whole church." And I like that because they're different men, but at the same time, there is common ground in a lot of things. We could give credit where credit's due. We don't always have to focus on like the differences. And I think being merciful is a beautiful quality in life. I mean, and he's giving credit where credit's due, but they're very different men. Talk about that, because I think in the church, there's a lot of differences. Like, we'll use an example of, say, the charismatic movement. I know a good priest. I go to confession with him in East Rutherford, Father Joe, another Italian. Went to Boston College, by the way. Great priest, but he's involved in the neo-catechumen movement. You know, he's invited me and my wife to go a couple times. It's not really my cup of tea, to be truthful with you, but I acknowledge it because it's bore fruit. And we can do that. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, I don't have to be a part of that group to acknowledge it as saying it's a part of the church. We're a little different. It's not my cup of tea, but I think it's a good thing. And I think he's doing that there. Talk about that, because
I think you're right. The Catholic Church is a beautiful garden, all sorts of different plants there, different colors, different shapes and sizes, and so on. And I think about that here at Ignatius Press from the beginning, 46 years ago. We've always had the Divine Office together. We say the office with Mass. We have Mass. We do the Rosary. We used to do it every day, but now we do it in May and October. And then the Angelus. Now, those things I think all Catholics should participate in one way or the other. And of course, there's private prayer as well. But I mean, in terms of outward liturgical ritual prayer. Oh, shoot, my phone is. Okay, sorry. But and we respect different devotions, but if you want to have Divine Mercy, that's fine. You want to have the green scapular, that's fine. The brown scapular, that's fine too. Whatever it might be. But these things are particular devotions for certain groups and not for everybody. Charismatic, that's great. And most of the charismatics I know are very, very both devout and orthodox. Neo-catechumenal way, they're doing great work. I mean, Kiko Arguello, who's quite a character, and there was a big meeting of all these married couples for Neo-catechumenal way. He said, I want 800 couples to go to China. He had 800 Catholic couples go to China. They're still there. You know, I mean, it was really amazing. But like you said, that's not my cup of tea either. So we've all got our mission, what God has called us to do. And the church is such a beautiful thing, that beautiful person, beautiful reality, that you see in it these different movements of the Spirit. And we're not all alike. And God bless diversity. Vive la différence, they say in French.
Well, I mean, that's the thing. Joe and I have found, Father Joseph Fessio joining us here at the front line with Joe and Joe. We don't other Catholic media personalities and things like that, podcasters and stuff. Joe and I never beat up on anybody. We're respectfully critical, but both of clergy, bishops, sometimes the laity. One thing that we're real tired of, is people who basically are saying, whether they admit it or not, you need to be a Catholic like I tell you have to be a Catholic. And I'm saying, I know enough about my church, in this church that I belong to. No, I don't have to be a Catholic like you. Quite frankly, I do pray the rosary every day, but quite frankly, I don't have to. I could pray the Divine Mercy every day. I could pray the Divine Office every day. All right. And it seems to be a little bit of a problem, is everybody wants to say, I got it all down. I got everything down cold. Father, I think you want to comment on that.
Well, yeah, it's an understandable thing, though. If you love something or someone, you want to share that good person or that good thing. And so if you've experienced joy and grace and peace and serenity and strength with certain practices, well, you want to encourage others. That's why vegans talk all the time. You can't shut them up. Why? Because they found something that's really, they think is wonderful, and they want to share it. Well, I'm not a vegan, so go ahead. I don't mind them. But like you say, don't try to impose it on me. But it's an understandable movement of the Spirit to try and share with others things you think are worthwhile and good, and especially something really deep like our faith. And so it's like I didn't drink wine for 20 years, until I got to France. And now I drink wine with my meal because it's not alcohol. It's not a drink, it's a food. It goes with a meal, right? Uh, and so now I not only drink wine, I make wine. I send people bottles of wine that I make. I'm trying to share it. No one's ever refused that.
I wouldn't. I won't refuse it. You can send one to me, Father.
Okay.
No, and again, that's what I mean. And I agree with you 1,000%. My only point, my larger point was that share the faith. And yes, certain pious devotions, things I've said to people, I think you ought to pray the rosary. I've said to people, I think you ought to pray Divine Mercy. I've done that. But my thing is in the Catholic media world, it seems to be different personalities wanting to not just share, because I agree with you, we have to share our faith, and I think that's a problem. But we won't dwell too much on that. We want to get back to the book. We talk about Cardinal Sarah's book that's available at Ignatius Press. He gave us so much, a tribute to Benedict XVI. That's available, as I said, at Ignatius, and we're talking with Father Joseph Fessio, the founder and editor of Ignatius. Joe Resinello.
I'm going to circle back to Benedict's trips to Africa. I know he was very impressed. We talked about that a little bit. I just want to expand it. Is it because they're poor? Most of Africa, I've been to South Africa, and it's not really an example of Africa. South Africa is very European, and frankly, there's Cape Town. There's a lot of wealth, to be truthful with you. When I was there, I know in some of the neighboring countries, there's a lot of poverty, and there is poverty too in South Africa. But to me, from my own experience of traveling through the third world versus living in America, in New York City, and you live in San Francisco, two wealthy hubs in America, you could be a wealthy Catholic. There are wealthy Catholics. I know the Napa Institute, very faithful, wealthy people. They share their wealth, but it can be a distraction. It really can. And I think that is problematic for, I think, folks in Europe and say in America versus Africa, where all you have is God. Let's be honest, and you cling to it. Talk about that. Is that a factor as far as why the church is thriving there, and in more comfortable places, in sometimes the culture really wants nothing to do with it because their faith's in the refrigerator?
Well, Jesus has told us that it's harder for a rich man to get to heaven than the camel to go through the eye of a needle. So you got some scriptural basis for that reflection you have there, Joe. I think it's partly the poverty. It's also partly the agrarian country. And I'll tell you a little story, maybe a long story. I'm an old man now, so I tell long stories, right? I wander around, so interrupt me from time to time. First of all, I was just thinking this morning about this. We talk about being civilized, right? What does being civilized mean? It comes the word civis. Civis in Latin means city. To be civilized means to have cities. We talk about politics. What is politics? Polis in Greek means a city. And we get polite from that. To be polite, to get along with people. We also get police from that when you're not polite. So civilization, police, politeness, it all has to do with cities. So cities are important. We can't do without them. You couldn't have this show without a city. A bunch of farms, you don't have a radio transmitter, right? Nevertheless, there's something about the cities which take us away from the natural and put us into the artificial. We build the cities ourselves, whereas out in the country, we have to learn to live with the land and get to know the weather and the soil and the seasons and so on. We have to kind of adapt to what we are given, not make things according to our own image. Okay, so here's my story. In 1987, because of another long story, I was asked to come to Rome for the Synod on the Laity as a peritus, which means an expert, which I was not, but I was a theologian. And I went there, and it was on the role of the laity. And the Americans, there were 4 Americans there, and what they wanted most of all was to have altar girls. That was a big thing. We didn't have at the time, at least legally or officially. So at the Synod, they would have the big session with everybody in the aula, the Paul VI aula, and then they break up into discussion groups, and they called circuli minores, little circles, and they were based on language groups. And so there were three English circles, and one from A to G, and I was in that one because I'm a Fessio, and then from H to some other letter, and then a third one to Z. And so I was there, and I met Cardinal Renzi, who was an A, and Cardinal Bernardin, who was a B. And Cardinal Bernardin was the one who was kind of the chairman of this little circle. So they're discussing altar girls. And Cardinal Renzi makes an intervention. He says, you know, Cardinal Bernardin, in my country, every home is also a shrine. And every father of the family is seen to be the priest of the family, the one who leads the prayers of the family. In my country, it would be totally incomprehensible to have a woman take that role of what a man should be doing, you know. And so Cardinal Bernardin was, well, yes, of course, we have to make exceptions for other cultures and so on. But his whole demeanor was very condescending and said, well, yes, you people are backwards and you're not caught up yet, so we'll make an exception for you. But basically, this is the way the church has to move forward. So I was, at the coffee break, I walked out with Cardinal Renzi. I said, you know, Cardinal, the fact that you and your countrymen don't think that altar girls would be appropriate, it's not because you're backward and unsophisticated. It's because you're closer to reality. You're closer to the soil. You're closer to the land. You're closer to nature. You understand that God has created us male and female equal, but with different roles. And the role of the man is to represent God the Father. The role of the woman is to represent all of creation, giving back to God, as Mary does, represent all creation. So that is a long way around to kind of respond to your question. Do I think that the poverty in Africa has something to do with their intensity of their faith? And I think the answer is yes, but it's also due to the fact that they are primarily an agrarian, nation, not a nation, continent, so that people are working with their hands, it's not financialized. They're not sitting in a back room somewhere shaving off a few percentage points as they do arbitrage on stock purchases,
Right.
That's not natural.
That's for sure.
No, that's for sure. Let's take a quick break. If you're just joining us here at the Frontline with Joe and Joe, pleased and honored as always to have Father Joseph Fessio, founder and editor of Ignatius Press, joining us for a great conversation about Cardinal Robert Sarah's book, He Gave Us So Much, a tribute to Benedict XVI. Please, as we always say, it is available at wider big box places, but buy it from the publisher. Support Ignatius Press. We always want to support our publishers. It's very important. They're putting out the books that we all need to read. Joe and I are trying to talk to the authors from Ignatius and others so that we can get these messages out there and we could equip ourselves.
Go first to your local Catholic bookstore, support your local Catholic bookstore.
And I keep forgetting to say that. I've said that on a few other shows, and I'm going to have to write it down. You know
All
me,
right.
Father. I'm Italian. What am I going to do? Listen, We'll be right back at the Veritas Catholic Radio Network. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back, everyone, to the Frontline with Joe and Joe Pasillo and Joe Rossinello. We're way in the breach with Father Joseph Fessio, and we are discussing Cardinal Robert Sarah's book, He Gave Us So Much, a tribute to Pope Benedict XVI, that is available at Ignatius Press. Joe Rossinello, how do you want to start this segment?
Well, let's talk about what Cardinal Sarah said basically to the reader regarding Benedict XVI. If you read this book, you'll discover something unexpected. I'll share something that I found to be unexpected about Benedict XVI, and then I'll turn it over to Father. I remember when he came to the U.S. When he was the Pope, and he addressed universities at Catholic University in D.C. I went to a Catholic university and a Catholic graduate school. I went to a Catholic high school, so I know a little bit about what's going on there. There's some good, there's some bad. I really thought that Pope Benedict was going to lay into us. I really did, Father. I'll be truthful with you. In fact, I specifically watched this talk because I was like, he's going to lay into America. And he didn't. He was gentle. He said the message that the university is supposed to be a place, for God, directing others to God. That's the primary focus of the university. but he was not like I would have been. I'll be honest with you. Thank God. That's why he was the Pope. But I mean, like I really found that to be, he shocked me. And Cardinal Sarah says that this book, there's a lot of things that we're going to read in it that are unexpected. Please share them.
Sure. Well, on the Pope's visit to this country, you're right. He can be very critical, but he's always does so in a respectful way and at the right moment and the right venue for it. And so he's a guest in the United States. He's a guest at the university. He's not going to dress them down. But if you listen carefully to what he says, you realize that he's holding up the image of what a university is supposed to be. He's not saying you're not that, but anybody looking at the image and looking at the university say, hey, there's a problem here. These things are not in focus. So about this book, well, first of all, it's an interesting book because it's got three different parts to it. And the first part, which in many ways is the most moving, for me anyway, was Cardinal Sarah as a friend and looked up to Benedict as his mentor, I believe, and spent a lot of time with him and wrote that book with him on a critical point of celibacy before the synod we had a couple of years ago. He is giving his own spiritual portrait of Pope Benedict. That is to say, we all know what he's like publicly. What's he like personally? What's he like interiorly? What's he like spiritually? And so Cardinal Sarah gives his spiritual portrait of Pope Benedict, and he centers it, of course, on God, on Christ, on God the Father, and how this was such a central point of the life of Benedict. So it's a beautiful couple of chapters there. Then in the second part of the book, he gathers together tributes that were made publicly to Pope Benedict after his death, including some that he did himself, but from others as well. And so it's like looking at something from different perspectives. You know that the famous statue, our Italian forebear friend of Michelangelo in the Accademia there in Florence, statue of David. It's sitting right there, standing right there, and you have to walk around it. You can't really appreciate that statue just from looking from one angle. You got to see it from all angles, different perspectives, and then you get a sense of what the beauty of that magnificent statue that he carved. Well, likewise with Benedict, with the second part of the book, you've got very important people and very perceptive people describing their view of Ratzinger, Benedict, but again, different perspectives. So that's a beautiful thing. Then the third part of the book, which is a real jewel, Cardinal Sarah has picked out homilies that Pope Benedict gave that were not published, or at least not easily available, on different kind of aspects of Pope Benedict's own spiritual life to kind of give a picture of him through his homily. So the subtitle is a tribute to Benedict XVI, and it really is a tribute to Benedict XVI. It's a beautiful one. A spiritual portrait by a good friend and collaborator, different perspectives from those who gave tribute to him after he died, and finally, homilies themselves of Pope Benedict that show different aspects of his personality. Really, it's a wonderful little book.
Absolutely. Father Fessio, how was Pope Benedict XVI a father to priests?
Say that again?
Benedict was a father to priests.
Well,
in what way? Elaborate on that if you don't mind.
Sure. So, I mean, the role of a father is to protect and to nourish, right? And the mothers do that too, but fathers do it in a fatherly way. And sometimes you have to apply discipline to accomplish that. And so he, both as a holy father, as a pontiff, as a bishop of Rome and bishop of the world in a sense, I mean, he spent his life trying to encourage others, nourish others by his writing, by his speaking, to help us grow more. And by the way, we talk about the church's magisterium, okay? That's the teaching office of the church. What does magisterium mean? It comes from magister. What's a magister? Well, we have the word master from that. Master slave, all right? It's one who's in charge, one who has authority. But it doesn't mean to dominate and be a tyrant. Magister comes from the word magis, which means more. A magister a true master, and the true magisterium is that which makes us to be more than we are. So that's what the purpose of magisterium is, and that's what he did as he taught. Secondly, we look at the word authority. Authority, auctoritas in Latin. We get the word auctor, author, from that. Someone who writes, right? Someone who creates, someone who brings something into being. But that comes from the Latin verb augere. What does augere mean? It means to augment. It means to make more, similar to magister. So authority, magisterium, its purpose is to serve others by helping them be all they can be and more. And that's what a true father does, and that's what Benedict did as a father.
Thank you for that. Father Joseph Fessio is here discussing Cardinal Robert Sarah's book. He gave us so much, a tribute to Pope Benedict XVI. So as Father mentioned earlier and corrected me, I need to remember to tell everybody to talk to your Catholic bookstore at your parish. Not every parish has a bookstore, but many of them do. Tell them to order the book, put it on the shelf. People are going to buy it. Okay, guarantee you. There's always people in the bookstore, and of course, if you can, also buy it from directly from Ignatius Press. Joe Resinello, I'm going to hit.
Ignatius.com. We have the same delivery speed and better price than the behemoth. So avoid the behemoth.
Avoid the behemoth. That's what we're going to put in the com box on this. Joe Resinello.
Father, Pope Benedict and Cardinal Sarah both wrote extensively about the liturgy. They had a collective view of the liturgy. Share that with us. It may not be where it's supposed to be now. I think we're going in a good direction. I always look at it, and I'll be honest, I said it third time. I am, I guess, a disciple, if you want to call that, of Benedict. I believe it's a reform of the reform. I don't sit in the traditionalist view. I believe in tradition, but I believe that we're in that lane. I look at EWTN as the mass. I think they do a really good job. It's a mix of Latin and English. It's nice songs. They're respectful. That's my 2 cents. I didn't go to the Gregorian. I went to Harvard on the Hudson, Father, St. Peter's College in Jersey City. But that's where I think it's going. What did Cardinal Sarah and Pope Benedict have to say about the liturgy?
Well, you've opened a subject, Joe, upon which I could speak at great length, because I myself have become more and more enamored of the beautiful liturgy the Church has given us. And I've come to recognize Pope Benedict and Cardinal Sarah as the great liturgoi, the great liturgists of our time. I'll say something just for the record, might be good to have it down here for posterity, about this expression you used, reform of the reform. On the Feast of the Annunciation in 1995, I was in Colorado Springs, Colorado. I heard a talk, I gave a talk too, but I heard a talk by Father Brian Harrison, OS, Ordo Sapientiae, Order of Wisdom. And it was called On the Reform of the Roman Liturgy. That was the title of his talk. And I listened to it intently. His main point was that after the confusion following the council, the liturgical response was not to simply obey the rubrics more, because the rubrics themselves are kind of, all these options are confusing, nor is it simply to go back to the Mass before the council, but rather to go back to what the council said, look at the Mass prior to the council, see what the council said, and then take the reform that was made after the council and reform that to be more consistent with what the council actually said. All right. Well, I was so impressed with that talk that I sent it to Cardinal Ratzinger. I asked him what he thought about it. And he wrote back this beautiful letter saying he agrees uneingeschränkt, without limitation, to the views of Father Harrison that we need a reform of the reform. So that's how that expression came into being, through Father Harrison, and then Pope Benedict made it his own, and it became, quite popular and well known after that. So that's one thing. The second thing is that Joseph Ratzinger, Pope Benedict, is the author of many books. However, very few of them were written as books. Almost all of them, with 3 or 4 exceptions, are collections of his lectures at university. For example, Introduction to Christianity, of his homilies, for example, seeing that which is above, of his talks. But in 3 occasions, he actually sat down and wrote books. One was a minor thing, was his first little autobiography called Milestones. Second was, and the biggest was as Pope, he wrote Jesus of Nazareth, 3 volumes, of course. But in the middle there, in the 1990s, he wrote a book called The Spirit of the Liturgy, Einführung in den Geist der Liturgie in German. And he spent 9 years writing that book. And I talked to him every year during that writing. That was his heart and his soul. He's a man of the church, a man of the liturgy, and he's a man of symbolism. He always sees important symbols in things, and he sees a symbol in his own birth. He was born in 1927 on the eve of Easter, on Holy Saturday, between Good Friday and Easter Sunday. He was born on Holy Saturday morning at 4:30, somewhere around that time. In those days, they celebrated the liturgy, the Paschal liturgy, the heart of the church's liturgical year. They celebrated that in the morning sometimes. So his mother brought him 4 hours later to the church, and he was baptized in the Easter Vigil liturgy 4 hours after he was born. He was born naturally and supernaturally in the heart of the church's liturgical year, on the Vigil of Easter Sunday. So that always marked him. He was a man who loved the liturgy. And I can tell you this: when you were at Mass with him, kind of celebrating in the congregation, as soon as he came into the sanctuary, it became a holy place. He just had a presence about him that was uplifting, that was holy.
Father Fessio is joining us here at the front line with Joe and Joe. Please go out and buy the book Cardinal Sarah wrote. He gave us so much, a tribute to Pope Benedict XVI. Father, let me switch gears just a little bit. I want to talk about a quality that Cardinal Sarah and Pope Benedict seem to have that Joe and I both think is quite overlooked, and that's joy. And where am I going with this? The world conflates 3 things: pleasure, happiness, and joy. Pleasure's in the body, happiness is in the mind. Joy is only in one place, Father Fessio, and this is where I'm going, and I want your comments. That's in the heart. And that doesn't mean you walk around with a smile on your face all day long. That doesn't mean that everything is going great in your life, okay? But if you possess that, the Lord's joy in your heart, life gets a lot easier. And Cardinal Sarah and Pope Benedict, both to Joe and I's viewing, had that joy, the Lord's joy in their heart. Please talk about that for a little bit.
That is right. And I remember years ago, I was on a pilgrimage with some people here in San Francisco. We went to Our Lady of Guadalupe, Mexico City. And we got in late at night, and we went to this parish that had an evening Mass. We had Mass there. But there was, on the wall of this parish, there was a portrait or a picture of Our Lady, an icon. And her title was Mary, the Joy of All Our Sorrows. The joy of all our sorrows. And that's just what you said, Joseph. We're not always smiling, laughing, cheerily, slap on the back, but there's something deeper. And even on the cross, there's something which is beatific in Christ. In the midst of it, even of his sufferings, there's a joy that can't be taken away. And it's like at every Mass before communion, we say, peace. The Lord says, peace I give you, my peace I give you. What's his peace? His peace is that deep inner joy that gives you the serenity and the calmness and the warmth that you always experience when you're in the presence of either Cardinal Sarah or Pope Benedict. So the answer is yes, Joe.
Yeah, I mean, and when, again, that's why we do shows like this. That's why I know you talk a lot and you're out there, because we have to dispel some of these ridiculous ideas that are out there about, well, what does heaven look like? I was telling my son the other day, I said, look, there is no baseball in heaven. All right. And
yes,
Bishop Barron might get,
Bishop
Barron might get
the Giants win. And the Giants are always winning.
But when people say like things like that, or like your atheist says, well, I would be bored in heaven. So it's just something I wouldn't. And I want to tell them, and I'm glad you said, it's like, that's the beatific vision is a peace, as Paul describes, that surpasses all understanding. And the joy that's in your heart, just looking at God, And I think that's what
Yes.
people don't understand about heaven. Look, I don't know if we're going to have a big party and drink some wine in heaven. I wouldn't mind it, but that's not why I want to go to heaven. I want to go to
Well, but
heaven
here's
because
the
I want
thing.
that peace and joy.
There's nothing good, holy, enjoyable here on earth, which is not present in heaven in a superior form we can't imagine. So it's not, and there's a great analogy here. C.S. Lewis is a great one for analogies and comparisons. In his book, Miracles, he gives the example of a father telling his young son about the facts of life, and about sexual intercourse and the joy that's there. And the boy says, well, can you eat candy while you're doing it? And father says, well, you're not going to want to eat candy while you're doing it, So that's like, we're not going to want to drink wine in heaven because we're going to have the eternal wine, the blood of Christ poured out for the salvation of the world, We're not going to have to, I bake bread. I bake sourdough bread. I'm not going to have to buy bread in heaven. We've got the bread of life there, the heavenly bread. So if you want baseball, you're going to have more than baseball. You won't think about baseball or football either. After last weekend, I'm not thinking about football too much. But
yeah, sorry about it. I was rooting for you. I was definitely rooting for you. Joe Rossinello.
I want to expand on joy a little bit because I think Mother Teresa would say joy is the net that catches many souls. I think people have to see that joy in Catholic families, particularly, and in clergy as well. But I think that's the best advertisement I think we have. Afterwards we could talk about encyclicals. Like I think people have to see healthy people, and being joyful is being healthy. God came to give us life and give it abundantly. I always say this. I mean, we've been doing this for quite some time, Joe Fessio and myself. God takes nothing from you. He only gives to you. And when we embrace the life of Christ in the church, we have joy. Our life is full. We're not missing out. I remember I was single for a long time, Father. I didn't know if I would get married. I think God was in a lot of ways, and I was chaste, to be honest with you, for a long time. And I remember being at my friend's 40th birthday party, and his sister, she was like, "You are wasting your life." And I was like, "No, I'm not. No, I'm not wasting my life." And I wound up getting married. I always have felt that in my heart. But at the end of the day, God didn't take anything from me. He only gave it. And joy has to be shown to the world. Let's talk more about that because I think that is key.
All right. Well, I've said many times that to me, there's no experience on earth which expresses the joy of heaven and the joy of being a Christian than a good Catholic family with many children living and working together. The joy you have there of new life, of diversity of different kinds of personalities and so on, and the love that's shown in different ways, filial love, sibling love, love to the parents, love to the children. I mean, why is that such a joyful thing? Because it's an image of the Trinity. God the Father gives himself entirely, and it's God the Son. The Son gives himself back to the Father. Mutual love is a spirit. God is a fruitful family living eternally, that circumcision, that joy. And what's the best image of that on earth? The best image of that on earth is a beautiful, holy Catholic family. It's difficult. This life is a veil of tears, as we say at the end of every rosary. And yet, why is that such a sign of joy? It's self-sacrifice, it's love, it's sharing, it's being different, and man and woman are different, children are different, so on. So, and I think that's, as you said, Joe, that's what brings people to Christ, is recognition of the goodness, the holiness, the joy of Christians. But I think Catholic families are one of the great signs of the world, especially in our country at our time.
Yeah. Father Fessio, let me ask you this. We have a few minutes left. Talk about, we're were Cardinal Sarah and Pope Benedict XVI? Were they close friends? Were they friends? How did?
Oh, yes.
Well,
Oh, very much so. Very much so. I mean, of course, Charles Schwab was younger by 20, 30 years, and he studied Ratzinger's works and so on. But they were very close. They spent time together, and especially when Pope Benedict had retired, Cardinal Schwab was there quite frequently at the monastery to visit with his friend.
well, yeah, because I didn't know. I mean, obviously, Cardinal Sarah wrote the book. He gave us so much, a tribute to Pope Benedict XVI. But yeah, I was just curious about that. As like, did they spend time together and stuff like that? So thank you for that, Father Joe Rossinello.
Do you think, obviously, when God calls Francis home, and it may be for 10 years, who the heck knows? God didn't ask me, but when Francis does pass, do you think we're looking one day to a pope from Africa? Is it sooner? I've heard different opinions on it. Clearly the European culture is still pretty strong when it comes to popes. I mean, gosh, the Italians had cornered the market for
The
400 plus
Italians
years.
dominated that office,
Yeah.
and God willed that.
So I mean, do you think potentially that could happen?
Well, potentially could happen. Joe, I am not a prophet nor the son of a prophet, all right? I would love to see Cardinal Sarah become Pope because he's got all the qualifications for it. However, being an old man now, I've actually lived through 7 papacies, all right? And they're different. Everyone has been different. And I've had the great joy and the great privilege of having time to study the whole history of the church and all the scripture and the fathers of the church and the great spiritual writers and so on. And so to me, it doesn't really matter too much who the Pope is. We have to have a Pope. Christ instituted the papacy with making Peter head of the apostles. But, for centuries, people didn't know who the Pope was or what he said. I mean, you're in some rural place, even in Italy, you don't know who's the Pope. You don't have newspapers, you don't have social media, you don't have television, radio. But the Pope is there. It's important at guarding the unity of the church. But the point is, I can't change my spirituality, my view of life, depending on who's Pope. I have to be a Catholic by uniting myself with Christ as he has expressed himself in the entire history of the church. So, yes, I'd love to see an African Pope like Sarah, but there's different kinds of Africans too, But that's in God's hands. I mean, that's his job. I'll just take care of my little portion of the vineyard here.
I hear you. Father Fessio, let me ask you this. We have about maybe 2 or 3 minutes left. Pope Benedict XVI, he gave a famous radio address in 1969. He said that in his view, the church was going to get smaller and poorer. Okay. And that's paraphrasing, but smaller and poorer, but its impact will be much more profound. Spend the last couple of minutes talking about, because a lot of people look at that as doom and gloom. Joe and I do not. Okay. But I want to throw that over to you. Like I said, Father Fessio, we have a good 2 minutes.
Okay. Well, speaking of prophecy, because that was prophetic, there was a radio addresses he gave in 69 and 70. Came out as a book called The Future of the Church. And Faith and the Future was called. And that's a book I recommend highly, Faith and the Future. The last chapter is called The Future of the Church. And he said exactly what you said, Joe, that he said, as our culture declines and erodes, the church too will suffer from that. It'll be smaller, but more intentional. People will have to be intentional Catholics because you're not Catholic because of the culture. They're Catholics against the culture in a certain sense. But he said, they will be creative minorities and they will maintain the faith. And as our culture goes further and further towards oblivion, when people finally wake up, they will find the church is there for them and welcome them back. It'll be their home. So yes, he does foresee exactly what has happened. Smaller number of faithful Catholics, but more vital, more vigorous, and more joyful.
Thank you for that, Father. Father, you working on anything right now?
Yes, I'm working on the Ignatius book fairs and book clubs. Scholastic Press, which puts on 120,000 book fairs a year, has gone completely woke. They've got gender affirmation stuff. They've got pornography, really salacious stuff in the books to kids. And so we've started Catholic Ignatius book fairs. We want to displace scholastic and Catholic schools for sure. We just had our first couple of fairs in December. We just had our first ones for this semester this week. And we have all the good wholesome books that are not religious specifically. We've got Catholic books, we've got Lives of the Saints, and we believe we have a much better offering for Catholic schools for any school than Scholastic has. And so it's a big operation. They're a $1.6 billion company. They sell 28% of the children's books in the United States. We are going to mimic them in a sense of doing what they're doing, but with content which is faith-filled and wholesome.
All right. And everybody out there who's listening to us at the front line with Joe and Joe, please pray for that venture. See, Joe and I think, Father, that's what Catholics need to be doing. They're set up over there. Well, we set up camp over here, and we're going to sell more books than you, and we'll get to the kids. Father Joseph Fessio, needless to say, spending an hour with you is, for Joe and I, is joyful. All right. It reinvigorates us as Catholics to get out there in the world. I have to go to work right after this because I have a job. Joe's a job. But you are truly one of our favorite guests. You come on the show. You're so gracious with your time. The book is He Gave Us So Much, a tribute to Pope Benedict XVI. The author is Cardinal Robert Sarah. The publisher is Ignatius Press. Avoid the behemoth. Buy it from Ignatius.com. Or go to your local bookstore, your Catholic bookstore, and ask them to order some if they don't have it already and put it on the shelf. Father Fessio, thanks again for coming by.
Grazie tante. Arrivederci.
Prego, prego. All right, he cut out on us real quick. And thank you for joining us here at the front line with Joe and Joe on the Veritas Catholic Radio Network, 1350 on your AM dial, 103.9 on your FM dial, spreading the truth of the Catholic faith to the New York City metropolitan area. Download the app, share it with your friends, wherever you see Joe and I on social media. Please help us out. Like, subscribe, share, do all that fun stuff. And remember, until the next time, that our conversation is your conversation, and that conversation is going on everywhere. We'll talk to you soon.